Greetings to members of the Executive Policy Committee and the public who are watching this, and thank you to all the delegations who came before and after me. My name is James Wilt. I'm a PhD student at the University of Manitoba. I'm an organizer with the group Winnipeg Police Cause Harm. I'm the author of a recent book about public transit published by Toronto's Between the Lines Books. I'm here today to speak about the proposed 2021 budget. And I'd request that if mayor or councillors wish to rudely interrupt my presentation or break my flow, that I receive extra time and compensation, as I've spent a long while preparing and timing this to fit within 10 minutes. There are many parts of this budget that I could speak about today. I could speak about how awarding the Winnipeg Police Service a $6.7 million spending increase, or $8.5 million if you include cash to capital and debt and finance charges, is a terrible idea given the last few years of highly visible police violence, including the killings of Aisha Hudson, Jason Collins, Stuart Andrews, Chad Williams, Machua Amadou, Randy Cochran, and Sean Thompson at the hands of the Winnipeg Police, as well as many incidents of assault, intimidation, and harassment, such as the ticketing of a person asking Patrol Sergeant Kevin Smith to wear a mask during a pandemic, and the pepper spraying of a cyclist by Patrol Sergeant Jeffrey Norman after being asked to turn off his high beams in a residential area. I could talk about how policing criminalizes and oppresses unhoused people, people who use drugs, sex workers, people with mental health and substance use issues, and queer and trans people. Or I could talk about the ever-growing salaries, benefits, and pensions of Winnipeg Police, and how they directly deprive funding from other life-sustaining services such as housing, public transit, harm reduction, food security, and income supports, all things that actively improve public safety. In fact, I could just read out loud the letter that Councillor Rollins wrote in July, calling for a 10% reduction to the police budget and reallocation to community. Another part of the budget that I could speak about is transit funding. I could talk about how a 6% cut to transit service during a pandemic is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. I could cite study after study showing that we need to be running more buses, not fewer, in order to decrease overcrowding, enable social distancing, and rebuild confidence in ridership. I could talk about why the only way to improve transit usage is to make it more affordable, reliable, and frequent. I could make the argument that this pandemic is a textbook example of why Winnipeg Transit's heavy reliance on fare revenues exposes it to volatile shifts in ridership, and why it's necessary for council to restore full transit service and pass a motion calling on higher levels of government for long-term operational funding for transit. And this is what I argued last week at the Standing Policy Committee on Infrastructure Renewal and Public Works. Or I could talk about how letting ride-hailing companies like Uber into the city directly undercuts transit's viability, or why cops spending 781 hours in Q2 of 2020 and 496 in Q3 patrolling transit and transit corridors is a gigantic waste of resources that should and could be put towards improving service. But at this stage in the budget proceedings, I'm far from convinced that any of that would be worth it. So what I'm going to talk about today instead is how Winnipeg City Council is making crucial budget decisions without any actual consideration of what many Winnipeggers want and need. Rather, Council is making budgets based on subjective opinions informed by the demands of the Winnipeg Police Association, True North Sports and Entertainment, and the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association. This blatant head-in-the-sand approach knowingly ignores copious evidence of what regular Winnipeggers are demanding. As a result, this budget process is not empirical and certainly not democratic. Council is ramming through a budget that they think is best, rebuffing any challenges to their authority or interpretation of reality. A perfect example of this is how the city produces and considers survey data. Yesterday, I presented to the Winnipeg Police Board about the need to implement a hiring freeze at the Winnipeg Police and reduce expenses through attrition, in addition to implementing a hard overtime cap. One of the pieces of evidence that I brought up for the need to do this was the City of Winnipeg's own online survey results. The #1 multi-year budget priority for constituents who responded to the city's online survey was community services, followed by investment in transit is #2. And as I'm sure you know, the budget survey also notes that the Winnipeg Police Service received the most feedback of any city services, mostly focused around shifting budgets towards community supports. In response to this, Councillor Mays challenged my use of these survey results, stating that the 768 responses that contributed were statistically insignificant. This claim was amusing to me for several reasons. For one, I imagine that if these results would suddenly be a lot more statistically significant if they showed support for police and roads rather than community services and public transit. Secondly, the undermining Okay, well, I'll just note, based on taking a quick look at the budget's tax-supported summaries, that City Clerk is receiving a almost $800,000 cut this year, and I would suggest that while defunding police, you might want to reallocate some of that to improving city clerk services and streaming. So I'll try to estimate where I was in my presentation. But I will start by saying at this stage in the budget proceedings, I'm far from convinced that any of this would be worth it. So what I'm going to talk about today is instead how Winnipeg City Council is making crucial budget decisions without any actual consideration of what many Winnipeggers want and need. Rather, council is making budgets based on subjective opinions informed by the demands of the Winnipeg Police Association, True North Sports and Entertainment, and the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association. This blatant head-in-the-sand approach knowingly ignores copious evidence of what regular Winnipeggers are demanding. As a result, this budget process is not empirical and certainly not democratic. Council is ramming through a budget that they think is best, rebuffing any challenges to their authority or interpretation of reality. A perfect example of this is how the city produces and considers survey data. Yesterday, I presented to the Winnipeg Police Board about the need to implement a hiring freeze at the Winnipeg Police and reduce expenses through attrition in addition to implementing a hard overtime cap. One of the pieces of evidence that I brought up was the need to do this was the City of Winnipeg's own online survey results. As you know, the number one multi-year budget priority for constituents who responded to the city's online survey was community services, followed by investment in transit as number two. The budget also notes that, quote, the Winnipeg Police Service received the most feedback of all city services, mostly focused around shifting budgets towards community supports. In response to this, Councillor May has challenged my use of these survey results, stating that the 768 responses that contributed were statistically insignificant. This claim was amusing to me for several reasons. For one, I imagine these results would suddenly be a lot more statistically significant if they showed support for police and roads rather than community services and public transit. Secondly, the undermining of the survey data acted as if the city itself isn't responsible for collecting information on the wants and needs of constituents, as if the survey data descended out of thin air with some other entity responsible for producing it and the city having no obligation to improve data collection processes. And thirdly, it's amusing because of all the other recent public opinion that exists pointing towards support for reduced police funding and greater support for reallocation of resources to life-sustaining services. We also saw the spirit of the same claim echoed by Police Chiefs Danny Smythe in his comments to the media yesterday, when he suggested that the five of us who spoke to the police board, quote, speak for a fairly small segment of our community, end quote, attempting to marginalize our perspective as fringe and irrelevant. So in these two examples, we can see high-ranking city officials dismissing demands for defunding the police based on a supposed lack of statistically significant data and a supposed lack of broad support from the community for these measures. But reality is very different, unfortunately, for council and the police. For example, a 2020 citizen survey by the City of Winnipeg found that when asked what actions the city could take to improve the quality of life in the city, crime and policing fell from 51% in 2019 to 24% in 2020. Meanwhile, improved services increased to 26%, overtaking crime and policing as what would improve quality of life. A recent poll from Angus Reid found that when asked about police funding, 36% of Winnipeggers said police receive too much funding and it should be reduced. That percentage was higher than any other response. In fact, only 20% of Winnipeggers said that police funding was too little and should be increased. So 36% of Winnipeggers said that police received too much funding, only 20% said it should be increased. Further, when asked about the potential increase or reduction of police spending, a full 67% of Winnipeggers who were polled said that they would prefer money invested in social welfare solutions like mental health resources and housing programs, rather than only 33% for more police presence. Or take the recent Statistics Canada report published only a few weeks ago. It found that only 29% of Winnipeggers think that police ensure the safety of the citizens in the area, compared to the average of 42% for CMAs across Canada. This is a massive indictment of the city's highest funded department, which is getting a $6.7 million raise as a reward. Or take a 2017 survey conducted by Pride Winnipeg that found 1/3 of the 600 LGBTQ people surveyed described negative encounters with police, especially by trans people, two-spirited people, and queer people of color. Or take the Justice for Black Lives actions this summer, including the incredible turnout of thousands of people at the legislature to protest police violence. It was by far one of the largest actions in Winnipeg in recent memory, alongside the climate strike of September 2019. And on that note, I should add, in the spirit of anti-empirical decision-making, that there's not a single mention of climate change in the entire 289 pages of this budget. The Justice for Black Lives event was followed by a week's worth of pop-up actions outside many places in Winnipeg, including City Hall, as you'll know, with each attended by hundreds of people. But all of this is being completely and conveniently ignored by council. The same goes for every critical presentation given today, including my own. Our presentations, which we have all volunteered our own time and energy to prepare, won't make an ounce of difference to members of this EPC. I could debase myself by pleading with you to implement a hiring freeze on police and hard cap on overtime, reallocate funding to community services and housing and safe consumption sites, and to work towards free and high quality transit as an urgent priority to confront climate change and reduce the unbelievable human and financial costs of automobility. But you made your mind up before this budget was even released. You treat every constituent who appears before you with brazen contempt, smug comments like, "Are you aware?" and extremely combative attitudes. We should not be made to feel anxiety, fear, or apprehension about delivering comments about the budget to a hostile council. You should not be simply tolerating our comments, but welcoming feedback in a gracious and considerate way. This is the precise opposite of this. Your decisions are being made based on subjective feelings and pressures from powerful lobby groups, not based on the wants and needs articulated by your constituents. You rebuff demands for change with tactics like claiming $50 million in provincial grants for community services or $2 million for so-called affordable housing as your own, or appealing to a supposed reduction in percentage increase in the police budget despite it representing the largest total increase of any department, or pretending a Bloomberg Harvard report will meaningfully change anything when you continue to shovel millions more dollars at police every year, with every new officer locking in a career's worth of salaries, benefits, and pensions. And when your own surveys turn up results that you don't like, you dismiss them as statistically insignificant and not worthy of consideration. This is a rigged process. I know it, you know it, and everyone watching this knows it. You've communicated loud and clear that you don't care what you think. The only material changes you're willing to make are what color to change the Winnipeg sign at the Forks. So we're going to start coming up with different ways of getting our messages across. Keep an eye out for that. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to respond to whatever condescending, dismissive, and adversarial questions you have.
Thank you. So Councillor Mays and Councillor Brody.
Thanks, James. Thanks to your presentation yesterday. I thought you scored a few points at my expense. You were in good form yesterday. Perhaps taking away from your point that we just don't listen, I went and dug up the not the Angus Reid, the StatsCan survey that you talked about, and I think I agree with you on one point at least. Maybe I don't. You talked about only 31% of Winnipeggers having confidence in the police, and that's actually the measure of a great deal.
A great deal of confidence, which is what I said.
I think you were saying confidence, or perhaps some of your.
No, I said great deal of confidence.
Fair enough. Well, roughly 60% more say they have some confidence, and then it tails off from there. So roughly 10% say they don't have any confidence. So just on the record, so 90-ish% say they have some or a great deal of confidence. Your better point, I think, though, and one that I will follow up on, and I'll ask some questions at the police board, is you had said, look, that's the lowest city.
Second lowest.
Right. Well, Winnipeg's at 31% for having a great deal of confidence in the police. That is troubling. That is well below Regina. Why is that? I think we should ask questions about that to the police. So I'll follow up on that. I thought that was a good point you raised. So I did say it wasn't statistically significant, but just for clarity, not because of the size sample, but because of the different areas from which it was drawn. I tend to agree with you. If we're going to do these exercises, the counselor shouldn't be put in the position of then saying, well, you know, that's not a statistically significant, that's not an accurate reflection across Winnipeg. So fair point on that. We talked a bit about that yesterday. We should be having something in the budget with a link to the appendices, with something that says whether or not it's statistically significant. I think that's a fair point. Maybe that wasn't you who said that. That was one of the speakers yesterday. So I will pledge to follow up on the point you made about why 31% have a great deal of confidence when it's much higher in Trois-Rivières and Regina and other cities. That's a fair question. So that's not really a question to you, but I think that's a valid point you made yesterday. And I dug out the Stats Canada survey, so it was a fair question. Yeah.
Councillor Brody, I think, has a question.
Sure. I just want to say thank you, James, first of all, for taking the time to be here today, and sorry about the technical gremlins that fell into things here today. I just have to say, though, when I talk to residents, what I hear is they want to feel safe in their homes. They want to feel safe when they go on the bus. They want to feel safe in the streets. You know, being overrun by illegal encampments in public spaces when they have to, you know.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just ask for a point of decorum with respect to the coining of the term illegal encampments. I just, it's veering too close to prejudice against those that are homeless for my liking. You're the chair, you get to roll.
I'll
Yeah,
withdraw that language, but people who are housed on public space in housing that does not meet city's bylaw requirements. I hear from people that pay for a lot of taxes year after year after year, and their home and their street is a donkey path. Never mind their own street, the major arterial roads are in a bad shape. They want more money spent on roads. They want more money spent on libraries. They want more money spent in their parks. But at the same time, they don't want to pay more taxes. So again, I appreciate what you're saying. I would like to see the police service more efficient. There's no excuse for some of the activities we've seen on YouTube this week or on the internet this week. But on the other hand, to suggest that we're all in the pockets of the Heavy Construction Association in True North is completely wrong.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, and I'll just ask my colleagues, if we could just direct our comments to questions for the delegations. We'll have lots of time at the EPC meeting next week, and of course at council, where we can provide our commentary, and I'll try to respect that myself as well.
Thank
So
you.
yes, please feel free to respond.
I'll just say that in addition to the points that I made about police criminalizing and oppressing certain communities in Winnipeg, it's also a terribly inefficient and extremely costly way of dealing with social issues. So we're putting $301 million into operation spending for police this year, and that doesn't include capital related expenditures, which increased that to $313 million. That's an extremely expensive department. And as we've seen very tragically today, we have had yet another homicide. And so I think there is a very clear situation that we're facing in which more policing does not mean that people are being kept more safe. What we know keeps people safe is housing, harm reduction, food security, good public transit, income supports, all these sorts of things, and addressing people's needs before these sort of terrible situations happen. So of course people want to be kept safe, and that's something that we saw in the multi-year survey, is that the number three after community services and investment in transit was public safety. And I don't undermine that in any way. Of course people want to feel safe, but the solution to that is not to continue to dump millions and millions and millions of dollars into this department that has not shown any sort of evidence that it's actually keeping people safe, but beginning to redirect that towards the things that actually do keep people safe, such as housing, harm reduction, and the things that I just mentioned. And so what I'm arguing for is similar to what Councillor Rollins argued for in July with the letter, was a 10% reduction in police spending and a redirection of that towards community. And I also think that requires a hiring freeze and a reduction in police spending via attrition and a reallocation of that to all the things that I've mentioned, because these are the things that keep people safe, that reduce very harmful police encounters. And as we've seen over the last 2 years, there are many of those. And so what I'm saying is that we need to reimagine public safety as something that is not responded to by police, that's responded to by many, many other things, including providing services and infrastructure for people who are in most need.
Thank you very much for your input to the budget process. Would invite you as well to continue to provide your input on some of these issues through some of the other forums, including the Winnipeg Police Service Board, and of course directly to the police. But we do appreciate your input today. Thank you.
Thank you.